While the pros have armies of people and mountains of technology available to gather and analyse their stats, the average amateur barely has enough time and occasion to make it to the first tee on time, never mind think about what are the best golf stats for them to be tracking. However, because the average golfer does not have 8-hour practice sessions 4 times a week to let them identify key areas of their game that they need to improve, actually serves to illustrate how stats are really even more important to them. But there are literally hundreds of stats that can be tracked, so it is frequently difficult for average regular players who want to improve to know what are the good golf stats that they should be keeping a track of. Unfortunately, also the traditional stats that amateurs have collected over the years, percentage of fairways hit, up and down percentage, and number of putts per round, etc., are binary yes-no answers to describe a very complex, multi-dimensional game, and as a result are frequently misleading and a waste of time to capture. In addition, a great deal of regular golfers find the task of collecting stats tedious and hard work. So in this video we focus on the 2 simplest and best stats, neither of which require any apps or devices all players should keep track of if they genuinely want to start looking at how to improve their golf game. Stats have a way of cutting the emotion out of the analysis of your game and help you focus on real problems rather than the ones you think are to blame. After all, you wouldn't let your doctor treat you without doing some tests first to highlight what the problem actually is. And the traditional measurement of driving performance in golf has always been fairways hit percentage, which is a stat that measures the percentage of time a tee shot on a par 4 or par 5 comes to rest in the fairway regardless of the club used. But the problem with this metric is that it doesn't tell a very helpful story about the quality of the drives that you play. For example, a top tee shot that went just 50 yards but ended up in the fairway on a 420-yard par 4 would count better for this stat than a 300-yard drive, which is in the perfect position to come into the flag, but only a couple of yards off the fairway in light rough. This, of course, is an extreme example, but if you look at this table published by golf stats guru Lou Stagner, showing how many more strokes players will average to hole out from the rough compared to the fairway, we can see the difference is in reality small. As Stagner notes, about half the numbers are 0.1 strokes or less, and as you get farther from the hole, the difference between rough and fairway gets smaller still. Admittedly, these numbers, which are based on the millions of amateur golf shots in the Arcos database, are a baseline for courses with typical rough height and will change slightly as rough gets very long or very short. But they do help to make the key point that the value to the average golfer of measuring the percentage of fairways hit to help highlight how good or bad their driving is overrated, and is therefore a stat we would recommend you should not waste your time collecting. A much better driving measurement for the average player, and the first of the 2 best and simplest stats we would recommend you keep track of, is the number of major driving mistakes you make in a round. And this is because the drives that destroy a scorecard the most are not the ones that end up in the rough, as we've already seen. They are the ones that go out of bounds, or into a hazard, or into major trouble, giving you no chance of hitting the green in regulation, or a net regulation if you take your handicap into account, and most likely require you to simply hit a shot to get the ball back in play. The biggest reason, therefore, for you not to bother with tracking your fairways hit percentage, but instead measure driving mistakes or in-play percentage instead, is because of penalty shots and recovery shots. It is clearly easier to play from a bad lie in the rough than hitting 3 off the tee, and to help us show just how much more important penalty strokes and recovery shots are when it comes to your scorecard, Stagner again provides superb evidence. Analysing the Arcos database of nearly 600 million amateur shots, he compared the difference between the number of fairways hit, penalty and recovery shots in golfers' top 20% best rounds and their 20% worst rounds. Looking at the fairways hit numbers first, he found that across all skill levels, the golfers averaged less than 1 fairway hit per round more in their best rounds compared to their worst rounds. But then, looking at penalty strokes and recovery shots, we can see that players at every skill level are hitting a lot more major mistake shots in their worst rounds compared to their best. And needing to hit 3 off the tee or come out sideways after going massively offline is a quick and surefire way to run up the big numbers. And big numbers, especially a few of them in the same round, are a guaranteed way to wreck a scorecard. Therefore, from now on, simply mark the holes where you make one of these 3 mistakes off the tee with any club, out of bounds, into a hazard, or into major trouble, to calculate your in-play percentage. The aim is, of course, to start cutting out the scorecard wrecking big numbers from your card. And once you've tracked this stat for a few weeks at your home course, You may find some trends emerging, such as particular holes where you're always making major driving mistakes. If that's the case, it may be time to start experimenting with a different strategy off the tee, either by picking a different target line or choosing a different club without, where possible, sacrificing much distance. Whatever the results, this stat will give you a clear indication whether your driving off the tee is improving or getting worse, and is a far, far better measure of driving success than tracking fairways hit. The second best and simplest stat that all golfers need to be focusing on is the dreaded 3-putt. All golfers are aware of them, hate having them, yet many continue to blindly measure the number of putts they have per round to assess their putting performance. But keeping a track of your average putts per round is not a great way to answer the question of how well you are putting. And the simple reason for this is that it takes no account of the distance you've hit your putts from, or the number of greens in regulation you hit. Let's take an example to illustrate this. One player hits all 18 greens in regulation and 2 putts every green, but none of their first putts were from closer than 40 feet. The second player also hits all 18 greens in regulation, but is within 8 feet of the hole for every birdie putt, and as a result makes 6 birdies. The first player takes 36 putts and scores 72, compared to the second player who takes 30 putts and scores 66. So the second player is clearly the better putter, and that is why they had a better round. Of course they're not. But just by measuring the number of putts per round, you will not get a true representation of how good a putter a golfer is. This example clearly shows the player who hits the ball further away from the hole but is a fantastic putter will be hidden by the number of putts per round statistic. So rather than keeping track of putts per round, your average golfer is again better served by aiming to cut out the major mistake of taking 3 putts to get the ball into the hole. Reducing your number of 3 putts has been proven time and again to be the quickest way to shave strokes off your score for the vast majority of amateur golfers. And the simple reason the average golfer with a handicap of over 15 will 3-putt between 3 to 4 times every round, which is almost 6 times more than the average PGA Tour player, by the way, is because they leave their first putt far too far away from the hole. ShotScope has found that the average distance the average 20 handicapper leaves their first putt away from the hole is almost 9 feet. But the bad news with that, according to Mark Brodie, Columbia Business School professor and the acknowledged godfather of modern golf stats, is that tour professionals make less than half, only 48% of their putts from 9 feet. So what chance does the average 20 handicapper have of making that second putt of about 9 feet if the pros can't do it half the time? Pete Sanders, stats guru to numerous PGA Tour players, including 2-time major winner and 2023 USA Ryder Cup captain Zach Johnson, also highlights just how bad the average golfer's mid-range putting can be. While on the PGA Tour the pros' average 2-putt range is 35 feet, in other words, only when putts reach a length of 35 feet will pros start 3-putting more than they 1-putt. The average 2-putt range for the average golfer with a handicap of between 15 and 19 reduces to just 16 feet. And as Sanders points out, 16 feet is a relatively short distance for the average golfer to start regularly 3-putting. So his view is that all recreational golfers should stop trying to hold putts from over 16 feet and simply start to aim to get the ball closer to the hole to give themselves a better chance of avoiding those damaging 3-putts. Remember that despite what you see in TV, and as we covered in one of our recent videos which you can watch here, the statistics show that even the best pros in the world actually hold very few long putts. For example, from over 20 feet they will only on average make 15% of them. In other words, they are only in reality holding those putts once in nearly 7 attempts. So if you're looking to save strokes off your score, get focusing on those mid to longer range putts and start counting the number of 3-putts you take per round and stop counting your total number of putts per round. It is an incredibly simple stat to keep track of and requires no app or device to measure. For some golfers, collecting stats is simply boring, while for others there can be a tendency to get lost in a sea of numbers without truly understanding what stats don't matter and which ones are the best for highlighting actual weaknesses in their game rather than perceived ones. But the good news for the average golfer, however, is that if they can be bothered to start to keep track of the right ones, and we believe these two are the best and simplest ones to measure to start with, there is a great chance they can have a big effect on their scores. We hope that you found this video useful. Please check out our other great videos, and most importantly as always, enjoy your golf.